Good evening, everyone. We continue our study in the book of Leviticus. We're in chapter 5, and it requires us to bear in mind that we are studying this book as a non Jew. And whatever we're looking at is really a description of some of the high level items that is important for us to read to understand the heart of God. We are studying the book of Leviticus not as a Jew. We're not here to look at exactly how they would practice it because there is much deliberation by the Jews across the ages that they would have different opinions of things. But what is important then for us to realize is why did God do all these? And I've also highlighted that we all should be cognizant, should be aware that much of what we read is really the outline. The details of execution is really very much part of the oral Torah, the traditions that they carry down as to the details as to how to perform them. Now, because we're not Jews, we are not privy to much of the things that is being discussed. But we will attempt to actually understand the motivation behind all these things, particularly in chapter 5. Now, in the first four chapters, we have covered quite a number of offerings. When somebody comes to the tabernacle to see God, should bring a gift, a korban. And there are various kinds, the olah, which will be burned. That would be the isheh. Some of these would be in the form of a cattle category, the big animals, then the small animals, and then the birds, and then the mincha would be the flour offering. Then we came to a point where we discussed the sin offering. Now, what is important for us then to remember is some of these are allowable for sharing of the balance of the animal, some is not. Otherwise, it is burned outside the camp. We now come to chapter 5, and chapter 5 deals with the offering in a slightly different way. And in this case, it is not about voluntary or thanksgiving or peace offering or the shalamim. We're now talking about things that they have conducted that is wrong. And so allow us now to begin in chapter 5. It starts this way. If a person sins, and by sinning, this would be khatat, and that means that he has made a mistake. And this, in this case, he hears the utterance of an oath, and he is a witness, whether he has seen or known of the matter. If he does not tell it, he bears the guilt. Now, since we're reading in the English, we're missing quite a lot of things in the Hebrew. The word guilt here is avon. Avon here is the mischief or the wrong that is being done in this case as a perversity of justice. And so this is a case where there is a court where the litigant, somebody who has to defend himself, brings two witnesses. And the person here is the witness. One of those witnesses, he is now responsible to tell the truth. And he either forgets that he have heard what the litigant has said in an oath as a promise, or he knowingly said that he doesn't know. See, all of these is part and parcel of the bear false witness idea, uh, because a defense or an accusation requires two or more witnesses. In the testimony of two or three witnesses, should the Sanhedrin uh, come together to judge. And if this person actually is told to become his witness and he refuses, or he is told that he should be a witness but he couldn't remember what he had heard, then if he does it intentionally, then he will have to bear his mischief because he would have failed to do his duty. So in chapter 5, we're dealing with some very specific cases where these individuals or persons, he sins by failing to testify properly, failing to acknowledge that he can be a witness, that he remembers but he doesn't want to be. So all of these are in that category. So the Jews actually sit down and deliberate all kinds of permutations. Would it be A, B, C, D, E, F, G? This is a fairly complicated one verse in the Hebrew, but not in the English. We come to verse 2. It says, or if a person touches any unclean thing. Now, the idea of unclean thing uh, literally would be whether it's a carcass of an unclean beast, or the carcass of an unclean livestock, or the carcass of an unclean creeping thing, and he is unaware of it, he shall also be guilty and unclean. Now, based on the English, we really can't tell a whole lot. And really, if you had touched anything, or a person actually touches anything unclean, it doesn't make it into a sin of any sort. He just have to go and clean himself. Now, touching any unclean thing generally would be a carcass, any dead body. But a dead body of an unclean beast or an unclean livestock, whether goat or sheep, unclean creeping things, they are not supposed to eat them. But the idea here, a carcass or a dead body, once a person touches it, serves that person to be unclean. But it is not a sin. However, it becomes a problem, him being unaware. Now, the idea of unaware is that it's hidden. He wasn't aware that it was unclean. But whether you are aware or unaware, if you touch any unclean thing, you will be unclean. And that would be the rule in God's mind. However, why would he be guilty is that without saying much, this word guilty is asham. That if he goes into the tabernacle and he eats clean things, then he is guilty. He has done wrong. Now, this idea of asham, see, we have seen a few things here. One, there is avon. So let me just give it a different color. We have an avon, which is guilt. We have sin, which is khatat. Now we have asham, which is guilty. Asham gives us a connotation of a character that, how should we say, a wrongful character would be a good way. Asham is a wrongful character. That he smells bad. That would be the literalness of the word. He's done something and he smells bad and needs to be dealt with. So we have three particular words here that in the English, people think of it as sins. But if we have the khatat, this is a miss. We have the avon, this would be a mischief. We have asham, and this would be a wrongful character, something that he has done wrong and he is guilty of. And he is only guilty of it because he had entered into the tabernacle. Otherwise, if he had gone home, that would be fine. There would be no guilt. And so we need to understand from their perspective and from the perspective of God, because God is concerned about his house. Remember, God's house, God's rules. If he goes home, nothing to do with God. But because we are dealing with the tabernacle and eventually the temple, he is guilty. Now, moving on, we only see this verse 3, if he touches human uncleanness, whatever uncleanness with which a man may be defiled, and we will see more of this defilement in the later chapters of Leviticus, and he is unaware of it, and when he realizes it, then he shall be guilty. Now, what does that mean? He's unaware, means it's hidden from him. He didn't realize that that was wrong. And then eventually, in verse 3, that when he realizes it, when he knows it, when he's been told, hey, that is wrong, and then he shall be asham. Now, in the eyes of God, if he's unaware of it, he it is not wrong until he realizes that it's wrong. And in this case, it's about uncleanness. It's not about all sorts of crime. So human uncleanness will be discharges of sorts, both man and woman, as well as some other skin disorder. Clean and unclean is of particular importance when a person comes to God, to the tabernacle or to the temple. And so God's house, God's rules, and God only admits those that is clean. And so clean animals, clean offering, clean priests, clean people. And that is what we are seeing here. If you commit any of these sins that you are not willing to become a proper witness, you have done some perversity of justice. Wrongful character, eating something that's clean, coming into a clean place. So 1, 2, and 3 deals with that. Now we look at verse 4. If a person, and in this case, swears. Now, swear is a formal oath in the name of God. In the Hebrew sense, to say it 7 times in the name of God, speaking thoughtlessly. Now, this idea of speaking thoughtlessly would be rashly. You think of it as unadvisedly. Basically, to make an oath without thinking hard with his lips to do evil or to do good, and this would be to himself. Now, evil and good is something that is negative and something that is positive in an oath to himself. And that's how the Jewish commentators would say it. And whatever it is that a man may pronounce by an oath, and he is unaware of it. No, he is unaware means that it was hidden. He didn't know that he had made something and he forgot about it. Because he is actively making an oath, it cannot be that he doesn't realizes it, but he has soon forgotten what he had said. And that is being trivializing an oath. It is important for us to realize in the mind of God, making an oath in his name is a major crime. If you say it and you don't do it, it is a problem. It's a serious problem. And we will see that in the coming chapters. Remember, this is about a person coming to God. When he realizes it, it means that when he is told, then he shall be guilty in any of these matters. The idea here in verse 5 tells us that he shall be guilty with any one of verses 1, 2, 3, and 4. At the end of verse 4, he says that this person should realize that he is asham and there is something he needs to do with it. So verses 1, 2, 3, and 4 are very particular instances of wrongdoing. Remember, the Israelites are now in a new national economy. And there is the tabernacle, the house of God, in their midst. And if they were to come to the tabernacle, they have to deal with these specific things in chapter 5. Now, these specific things in chapter 5 are not what we call severe crimes or severe sins or severe uh, wrong or mistakes that carry severe punishment. These are what we would call lesser of the wrongdoings. And chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4, and now chapter 5, deals with such the unintentional, inadvertent things that you don't know, that you realize now that you do in these 4 items, that you are now told, you now realizes it, then you need to do something about it. Verse 5 then tells us that, and it shall be when he is asham in any of these, that he shall confess that he has sinned that thing, and he shall bring his trespass. And verse 6, the idea of trespass is his guilt, his asham. Trespass offering is also called asham. Just like sin offering is called khatat, and to sin is khatat. Trespass offering is asham, and to be guilty is also asham. And so we find that in the English, we would lose these kinds of nuances. He should bring his asham to God for his sin which he had committed or he has sinned. From the sin that he has sinned, I think would be a better way of stating it. Right? From the sin which he has sinned, which he has khatat. And this is khatat. And so you find that these are all play of words. Guilty, trespass offering, same word. Sin, committed, same word. Now, in this case, there is a requirement to bring a female from the flock, the smaller of the animals. Remember, there are 2 categories that we saw. The bakar, the larger animals, likened to the bulls and the cows. And then the flock, likened to the sheep or the goats. So a sheep or a kid of the goats as a sin offering. So the trespass offering, the guilt offering, is to be atoned. And so the priest shall make atonement for him concerning his sin. Because 1, 2, 3, and 4 are done, and when it comes to realization, that sin needs to be submitted as a ritual with a lamb or a baby, a small kid. And in this case, you shall see that it's a female, like the sin offering, like the khatat, a female. And the priest shall make kafar for him, shall cover him concerning his khatat. So think of it this way: atonement comes from the word kafar, is to cover. And then once there is a cover, a covering, then there is a kifer. It comes from the same root word. This is to cover sin or debt. This is the concept of covering. That once it is covered, then the sin or debt is no longer a problem. And so atonement, when we see it in chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4, is to deal with all these wrongful character, unintentional mistakes, accidents, things that you forgot, things that you didn't realize, and now eventually you realize that you have been unclean because you have come into the sanctuary, to the tabernacle court, eaten something clean. So all of these are what we would call from chapters 1 to 5 menial errors, menial sins, things which don't have to die. If there are crimes that God has described, that if you abuse intentionally inside the sanctuary, then there will be an immediate judgment by God. And we will see that as well. The sons of Aaron would have done that. And so please bear in mind that chapters 1 to 5 deals with small time, unimportant, in the sense that they do not carry an execution. It doesn't carry a major punishment. It doesn't require somebody to be stoned. There is no capital punishment accorded to these events. And then they can now come and fix the problem. And so atonement here is really to fix these problems, to cover it up properly by the rituals that God has so declared. Remember, God's house, God's rules. The interesting thing about this chapter is that we can see the character of God. Yes, God wants them to fix these problems because it doesn't carry a capital punishment or anything major, but yet they still need to deal with these small misdemeanors, if you want to call it that. First, he has to bring a female sheep. But if you can't bring a female sheep, if he's not able to bring a lamb. Now, verse 7 says this: if he is not able to bring a lamb, or he's not able to afford a lamb, if he's not rich enough to afford such a thing, to pay for it, to take care and bring a lamb, then he shall bring to the Lord for his asham, right? For his guilt offering, the guilt that he has committed, the wrong that he has committed that made him smell bad. He can bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. We saw this in the Olah, that there was a bull, there was a young ram, or a male goat, or a turtle dove, or pigeon, and then eventually a mincha. And if you really can't, then a flour offering would be sufficient. But these are what we call variable sin offerings. Sin offerings accorded by justice of God, that if you can't afford it, you can bring a lesser atoning offering or a sacrifice. And in this case, if you can't afford this animal, then you can try to bring two birds. One as a sin offering for the atonement, the other as a burnt offering as a thanksgiving. And so that would be sufficient, and in God's rules, that is fine. And he shall bring them to the Kohen, who shall offer, which is for the sin offering first. There is an order. You can't have a thanksgiving until the sin has been atoned for. So he wrings off the neck, the head from the neck. He shall not break it apart. He shall sprinkle some of the blood of the sin offering on the side of the altar, and the rest of the blood shall be drained out at the base of the altar. How exactly it's done, remember, we're not really told. So the details of this slaughter is done by the Kohen, the priest, and he would know how to deal with a bird. Like in chapter 1, as I mentioned before and alluded many times, the written Torah gives us the high level, what needs to be done, but the oral Torah gives them the details of how it should be done. And so the first one is a sin offering. And then he shall offer the second bird as a burnt offering according to the prescribed manner in chapter 1 and Olah, to bring together the relationship with God, to clean himself of the foul smell, so to speak. And so the Kohen shall make atonement on his behalf for his sin, which he has committed, and it shall be forgiven him. Remember, all of this is about atonement, the covering of the sin. Once the sin is covered, then it will be lifted. This idea of forgiveness is to lift up, to send away, to pardon. And that's what it means, the lifting up of the debt. So this is equivalent to a pardon. And so that's how we translate it in the English. So what's important is it is the priest that will do all these rituals. The asham offering, the khatat offering, it's all done by the Kohen. Once the ritual is done, then there is kafar, the covering. And with the kafar, then there is the nishlak, or the shalak, the salak, right? The nislak or the salak. This would be the lifting. So at the end of the day, all these has to be done. And it is the ritual by God. So God's house, God's rules. But this is for the menial wrongdoings. This is the pattern that God has set. Now, what is important for us to realize is that now God also realizes that if he is not able to bring two turtle doves or two young pigeons, meaning if he can't afford, not able to afford, he is that poor. God says you still have to do something. Then he who Khatat shall bring for his offering 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour as a sin offering. This would be the sort of a mincha type, using flour as an offering. Why does it? Why does God require a flour? Because even if you are really, really downright poor, you should be able to afford flour because you need to eat. Fine flour would be flour that is grounded into a powder form. And this is a particular weight, a tenth of an ephah. Exactly how heavy we really don't know. But it is a fair amount of flour which they have to bring. And then he atones it for his sin. So he has to go through all this ritual, whether with an animal or a bird or flour. He shall put no oil. Remember, in an olah, in the burnt offering, uh, in chapter 2, the mincha, he was going to put oil and then frankincense, because these are all thanksgiving. But in this case, as a sin offering, no aroma is supposed to be there because it's a bad smell that you need to get rid of. No frankincense, no incense, for it's a sin offering. It's bad. It's to absolve a bad thing. He brings it to the Kohen. The Kohen shall take his handful of it as a memorial portion. Like in chapter 2, the mincha, not everything you bring, but a handful. We have talked about it in chapter 2. That would be 3 fingers full. This word here in the oral tradition will be 3 fingers full. And then it will be set to burn. Now, verse 12 says here, burn it on the altar would be cause to smoke. Cause to smoke. How can you cause to smoke? It is to burn it, and that's how it is translated. On the altar, according to the offerings made by fire, offerings made by fire, remember, it is an isher to God. In this case, it is a khatat. It is a sin offering. The priest shall make atonement for him. The idea of that the priest shall make atonement for him is because the priest goes through all these. And then by finishing it, he would have kafar for him. And then it tells us his sin that he has committed in any of these matters shall be lifted or forgiven. The rest, beyond the 3 fingerful, shall be the priest as a grain offering. And so the balance goes to the priest, just like in chapter 2. We come to verse 14. Verse 14 is an and then. It starts with an and then. The ones above is done. And then God spoke to Moses saying this. If a person commits a trespass, no, and sins unintentionally in regard to the holy things of the Lord. Let's break this down. This word here, commits a trespass, some form of a betrayal. Unfaithfulness, I think, would be a good word here. Unfaithfulness. He has done some unfaithfulness, some things that he has acted treacherously, acted unfaithfully. I think that would be a useful way. He had pretended that he is faithful, but actually he wasn't. That is this idea of a trespass. And he sins unintentionally. Now, again, this is like in chapter 1, this is by accident. He did it without realizing it, and it is with regards to the holy things of God. Now, understand that the holy things of God literally means that these are the things that is in the tabernacle. When a person does these betrayal, the unfaithfulness, and he is doing it, he's eating things that he shouldn't be eating, and he thinks that he can eat, and it is wrong. Holy things, in this case, would be what we call the lesser degree errors. Now, I need to highlight this. It is not all kinds of errors. Chapter 1 to 5 talks about the lesser degrees, the smaller problems. In the holy things of God, if a person actually violated it, like how God tells the priest not to do, and they do it, it is serious. And so later we'll see what God does. But here we're talking about the common folk, not the priests. And they may not know everything. And so God allows for the the option or the leeway that the general person may not be fully aware of what he can and cannot do. Why? Because it is the Kohen, the priest, would be the one who would teach them. Maybe the priest didn't say it very well or very clearly, and they didn't hear it very well. And so God is giving the leeway to the common person. Please note, it has nothing to do with the Kohen. Only the common person may have made mistakes and accidents and not realizing it because they don't have the scriptures with them. The written Torah stays with the priest. The priest is the one that will safeguard what is clean and unclean, to deal with what God needs to deal with, and God will be very severe with the priest. And so, chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and right now in verse 14 and 15, it is just a general person. And then God gives the allowance. He says, then he shall bring to the Lord as his asham. Trespass offering is an asham, the guilt offering. And so in this case, a ram without blemish, always without blemish, without having to say. This would be a male goat, right? A male goat. This really is clearly a male. A male goat from the flock. And there is a valuation in shekels of silver according to the shekel of the sanctuary as a trespass offering. According to them, is a ram in the second year, and it's at least 2 shekels of silver. What is important is that these are things that the Israelites will know what to do, how to do it, and how to uh, execute these rules. The priest is to do that. And so this would be his asham. The common person wouldn't. The common person would be told, just bring your ram and we'll evaluate it. And then he shall make restitution for the harm that he has done in regard to the holy thing. Now, this idea of a restitution, we need to always remember, make restitution here is shalem, to make whole. Remember what we talked about, the peace offering, the shlamim, is when somebody has fulfilled the oath or has fulfilled what needs to be completed. And so here, make restitution means to make complete, right? Make complete for the harm that he has done. Now, this idea of the harm would be the khatat, the error, the khatat that he has acted on, or he has performed, right? And then he says, if you add to it 1/5 and give it to the priest. What this means is to add 1/5. This is a 20% interest. Restitution is part and parcel of the law that this person will owe God, make restitution with the trespass offering plus 20%, and to give it to the priest, and the priest will take it. And the priest will make covering for him with the ram of the trespass of the Asham, and it shall be lifted from him, that the guilt will be gone, the smell will be removed. And so it's always the priest that will do all this. And God is now making these rules. Why does God make these rules? Because these are all small degree errors. It can be easily fixed. And these people who have done these kinds of errors, unintentional, because if you have done it intentionally, you will have died. Because it's unintentional, it can be fixed. We come to the last part, verse 17. If a person, a common person, sins, and this would be khatat, and commits any of these things which are forbidden to be done by the commandments of God, though he does not know it, meaning he is not aware. The idea of he does not know means he is not aware that it is a problem, right? Not aware that it is a problem, that he has done something wrong. Who can tell? The priest will know. Yet he is guilty and shall bear his iniquity. He has his asham, right? Now, in this case, it would be things that God says you cannot do, and you have done it. And this is not because you did it intentionally. Remember, chapters 1 to 5 deals with the small, lesser important things. If the priest had done it, then it would be a totally different issue altogether. But the common folk, God gives the leeway. And if he does this, then he shall need to deal with the avon. You see, asham, avon, khatat. These are the three categories that we need to deal with and be very clear. And we see that it is done in this way in chapter 5 to show us that even the smallest of things, God wants it to be dealt with because they have done something that offended God, but it's not so severe that there is a crime or a penalty that is accorded to it. Then he shall bring to the priest a ram up to 2 years old, without blemish from the flock, with your valuation of at least 2 silver shekels of the tabernacle, as a trespass offering, as an asham. So the priest shall make a kafar for him regarding his ignorance. Remember, his ignorance means his error, his accident. He didn't mean it. He wasn't aware, was not aware. Now that he's told, he needs to bear his guilt in which he had erred. So these two words, ignorance and erred, are the same words. He did not know it, and now that he does, it shall be forgiven him only after the trespass offering is given. It will be a ram perfect. And so, in conclusion of this chapter, it is a asham that he has certainly asham against God. See, all these are in the Hebrew. The trespass offering is asham, and he has certainly asham against God. He has done something that has offended God. Small it may be, but it smells bad. He has done a wrongful thing. His character is affected. And God says, you need to rectify. We see that in chapters 1 to 5 deals with such sins, errors, mischief, accidents, things which are not major. Because when it's major, it won't be here. You cannot have killed a person and bring an offering. None of those will matter. God has his rules to deal with the major things. Chapters 1 to 5 deals with the small things, the uncleanness. God sees it as a problem that the common folk may have done unknowingly. And so God says, deal with it, clean yourself. Now, what is important now in these 5 chapters for us to realize is that God is a just God. We're dealing and looking at it from a non-Jewish view. We're not particular about exactly what the sins are, what the things that they have done wrong or made a mistake, and how to offer. The Kohen does the rest. They just have to realize it and do it. They don't need to know a whole lot of things. And so God wants them to obey God's house, God's rules. You want to come, do what I want you to do. But God is a just God, as you can see. If you are rich, you bring a bigger offering. If you are poor, you bring a smaller offering. In this chapter, we have seen that it goes from a sheep, a goat, to 2 birds, and to a flour offering. It is important for us to realize that God really wants the common folk to deal with these matters because God has not prescribed a death penalty. They still need to deal with it because small things, if not dealt with, can eventually become a big thing. And so, in the eyes of God, there is justice. You offend God, you deal with it. But if you can't afford it, there are decreasing values of offerings, of sin offerings that you can bring. God is fair because God wants it done. God allows for these. Most importantly is that these people, if you are rich, you don't bring something that is accorded to the poor. In that sense, you will even have committed a more drastic sin, and that will be dealt with differently because you would have cheated God. And so I think that we can come away from these 5 chapters without having to really fully appreciate the details because much of the details need to come from the oral tradition, and because Jews and the Israelites need to deal with it themselves. The tabernacle is with them, the temple is with them, and they know what to do. But for us, when we look at this, is to see the heart of God. God is a just God. God is a fair God. God doesn't close his eyes on little mistakes. Needs to be dealt with too. And so God has rules for the general population as well as for the important people in the community, including the priests. And this in itself is important for us to realize in chapter 5. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.